Now, Doctor, welcome to the show. Say hello to everybody out there. I appreciate you coming on the show with us.
Well, I appreciate you having me, Matt. It's a real honor, and in particular, as I told you before, I'm really a big fan of what you do and how you do it. In particular, I think you have more psychological savvy than most shrinks.
Oh, man. You talk to a lot of my friends, they may not think that, but go ahead.
Well, they don't think I do either. I'm referred to as a blue-collar shrink, but I'm retired, so it's okay.
Okay. Now, when we were talking, it was almost like an instantaneous connection.
Yeah, I felt the same thing.
And you wrote this article here, and we're going to go over a lot of this stuff in the article, but I sent you an email that basically said, there's a lot of scientific words in here. I'm the kind of guy, and I've come to realize a lot of my students just want to know brass tacks.
Right.
I get all these technical state terms and legalese, and I read it to them fast, and I go, here's what it really means. And they go, oh, I get it. So that's what we're going to do today, right?
Right. Well, I'm down with that. That's the way I am, too.
You've been listening to the show, and you heard I was going over body language and ego states, and I did that purposely today to set us up because those are different aspects of what we're going to be talking about, which is going to give us the edge. So, Dr. Trent, I want you to tell us, why don't you just take the floor, because we're both of like mind, and start explaining as to why or what you do or how you think about it and why probability is absolutely imperative to understand, learn, and know, as well as possibilities and all the other aspect of it to being safe and trying to get out of a situation.
Right. Well, there's a lot of sources of data, and you cover them very well. The problem seems to be that we have, and this is drilled into us at all levels, we have situational awareness, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have situational understanding. And where probabilities come in is, I like templates because they're convenient. They always work except for when they don't, so
right.
Get another template, But anything is possible. The thing is, how probable is it? Now, it's real tricky when you're in a confrontational or adversarial situation. Adrenaline kicks in. It compromises lots of things. Your mind is going 1,000 miles a minute, and you have to find a way to slow it down a little bit. So, and templates are good for that too. So that you're able to really assess the probability of what's likely to happen next. And that's a reason why I really like the OODA loop, because it's not foolproof. It's probably misunderstood by a lot of people because it doesn't really work the way it's laid out.
I read that in your article, and I want you to explain to everybody what that stands for and what it means.
Right, okay. The OODA loop was developed, and gosh, I can't remember when, but it's a lot of years ago, by an old retired Air Force colonel fighter pilot. And if I'm right, I think John Boyd was at the end of World War II, through the Korean War, and probably into Vietnam. So he's one of those crusty old guys that you kind of look to for wisdom. So he set it up like this. There are four major components in the loop. First is observation. Okay, that's big, and we can go into that in more detail if you want to. Second is orientation, and that's where you're figuring things out and putting things together. Now, in practice, in reality, the way I see it, observation, orientation, they're one big thing together because it's a constant process. So I call it observation and orientation. Now, the third component, according to Boyd, is decision, and that's where you come up with a plan, and hopefully that plan will do a couple of things for you, because it's your conclusion. Your time is out. You might have all the time in the world. That's a good thing. More often than not, you don't, but whichever way, time is out. So you want a plan that will, and a set of conclusions that will allow you to unhinge your opponent, possibly create an op-tempo he can't stay up with, create chaos for that guy that he certainly won't be able to keep up with, and also be able to execute your plan because you have that much going for you. In other words, you want to take the initiative away from him. So,
and this isn't a long, drawn-out process.
Well, it can be. I had an incident, a confrontational incident as it was last December up at Lake Buchanan, and I had a couple, 3 minutes to do this. So it was. I can tell you about that if you want to. It was probably 2 or 3 minutes, but mostly, as you teach, I'm sure, you've got to be able to respond in a hasty manner, but still do it in a calculated way. And that's the trick when you're under pressure.
Yeah, there's a fork in the road. How much time do I have? If there's no time, there's two mental thought processes about it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, and Colin Powell wrote an awful lot about that too. So the final part is basically action. You take the initiative. You do it. Now, what I really, really like about this is that, first of all, you're doing things, even if it's in a short space of time under extreme pressure, you're doing things in a calculated manner. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. You're building confidence while you're doing this. And finally, the thing I like best about it actually is that it is something you're able to articulate later. And that's where things tend to go south, is after the engagement. Now you're into the legal system, whether you like it or not. If you have that template, that OODA, you can more reasonably articulate it to decision makers in the district attorney's office or to the police or whoever it may be, why you did what you did and how it laid out, how it unfolded. And I think that's an excellent thing.
I read in your article about that. Yeah. You gave an example, basically, the person saying one thing as compared to breaking it down like you just said. Do you recall that example that you gave in the article? It was you're panicking. Well, I shot him because I was, I didn't like how he looked.
Yeah.
And that's not very descriptive.
Well, I felt threatened, so I just hauled off and shot him. That doesn't fly. You're going to get billed with a grand jury.
So what you were explaining was it gives the decision makers the inside of your brain of how you were ticking. It shows, hey, I didn't want to do this, but it came to the point where I had to do this, and it was a thought process, not just a reaction.
And as you know, things either slow down or they speed up. Mostly they slow down, but it goes so fast. That's why
it goes fast, but it seems like it's slow.
Exactly. LEOs will tell you, like I didn't really realize I fired a full magazine. I just thought I fired a couple rounds, but that's how things go. So to be able to go back and reconstruct based on a model or a template, I think that's just a winner. So that's why I like this, and it's worked for me once with a couple of mistakes that I made that after action wise. But
you're gathering all this knowledge and information from what experiences?
Well, from experience in the Army, where that started was I got to Fort Hood in '97. I reported into a brigade out in 13th COSCOM, and I was supposed to be like the brigade shrink or something, and wow, it turned out that the commander and the chief of staff, old buddies of mine, they said, you don't ever do that, do you? I said, no, I'd rather not. I like getting back to troops. So they said, well, how about standing up our G2 shop? And I said, okay, I can do that. I've been an S3 at battalion and brigade level, and they're usually rolled in. But they wanted to stand up an intel shop. So good deal. Until the first exercise, command and staff exercise. Man alive, there's just more data coming at you than you can shake a stick at. And that's pretty realistic, except in the old Army, you didn't have computers, so you could kind of edit out stuff, but now it's just overwhelming data. So I was asked, are you aware of this? Yeah, I'm absolutely aware of it, sir. They never asked the other question, do you understand it? Because the answer would have been, no, I don't get it, man. It's just too much data. So that's when I started really looking into things like the OODA loop and realized very quickly that situational awareness, good deal, situational understanding, better. So there's got to be mechanisms that we can use even in a hasty situation.
Okay, let's put this in street terms, okay?
Sure.
For people like me with a 25-cent IQ, okay? I've got a license to carry because I'm a good Joe, I'm an honest guy, right. I want to defend my family, friends, and property. And people out there are bad. Some people out there are bad, and they want to hurt you sometimes. And in your article here, and ladies and gentlemen, we got an article here from the Concealed Carry magazine. It was from 2006. So if you want to reference that on your Google searches or whatever, you can read the article. But in it, you broke down the different types of paths, psychopaths,
Right.
I'm thinking, should we talk about, because we only have like 15 minutes, should we talk about all the different types of mental attitudes out there?
No, you could probably post that article if you wanted to. I think the pertinent thing to talk about is really human nature and a knowledge of how things work psychologically. So what we're talking about is personality. Now, that's a psychological term, but it's a real term too. Personality really is the sum total of your assets and your liabilities. Okay, and that's it. It's a stable, enduring way that you scan in the world, think about the world, and stylistically behave in the world. So the more you know about personality traits and how they kind of cluster together, I think the more informed you are, And I think that enhances situational understanding. You don't have to have a PhD or an MD or a DO. It's not necessary. I don't think you hold a PhD in psychology, but you got that great savvy about things, and you know what you're seeing. You can recognize it.
I would call it street smarts.
Well, that's another way to call it, street smarts. I think even though those are great, you can enhance those too by having some knowledge of what's going on in the other guy's brain and what it probably will be, not necessarily what it possibly will be. That makes sense.
All I know is when we talked, you said one word that just opened up the floodgates of wanting to learn.
It wasn't the F-bomb, was it?
No, that was the second. No. It was the word probability.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always thinking situational awareness.
Right.
And I'm always looking for body language, but I do what you're saying about what's the probability that's happening based on what I'm seeing, body language, attitude, gut feeling, personal experience. But I thought that was the information in the crack. Everybody's walking on the sidewalk, but there's all that good information in the crack. And I wanted to talk about that, but I was thinking, you got like a person with a paranoid personality. You got to think, what is a paranoid personality, and how may that person react in a situation?
Exactly.
And what would be a trait? That's what I was thinking we could hit on.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. Now, personalities can rise to the level of a disorder, but more often than not, they're just traits that we may or may not have. But they cluster, and one of the clusters is into this paranoid personality type, whether by characteristics or traits. So here's a person, and we all know them. They're basically very distrustful by nature. They tend to read hidden meanings into otherwise benign remarks. I can think of one many years ago that was on staff with me in 3rd Infantry. I mentioned to him one day, I said, and he was an odd guy like that, very distrustful, suspicious. I mentioned, hey, he came in one day with a high and tight, and I said, hey, cool haircut. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean by that? He started getting angry. And he started ramping himself up, and I'm going, holy cow. So I wasn't a shrink in those days, but I could figure out right then that this was an odd guy. So they're people who kind of move either away from people or against people. They're just on guard for any insults, anything that might demean their character. So let's say you're seeing that in an adversarial confrontational situation. That's data. That's good data. Because the fact is, while I don't think most of them are just inherently dangerous, and if you can't de-escalate the situation, which is hard to do with a guy like that, you know what? You need to know that if you press them too hard, they can be dangerous.
And that's where the probability comes in.
And that's because one of the components of personality is impulse control, is cognition, emotions, quality of your emotions, range of emotion, appropriateness. But the very last one we talk about is impulse control. You don't have a clue because you probably don't know the guy. Now, if you know the guy, okay, you can decode it real quickly. You don't know the guy, your mind has got to process that. It's like in the orientation part of the OODA loop. What you're doing there is really just reassessing, developing, as the situation unfolds, developing new information, looking for mismatches between your first understanding, your understanding now, and trying to harmonize all this. And that goes pretty rapidly. But it's data, and it's data that leads to a plan. So knowledge of psychological characteristics that you ought to be on the watch out for, that's data also.
Okay. Dr. Trent, give us, if you can, there's different, I guess, personalities.
Mm-hmm.
I just named one. Can you list us, what was it, 4 or 5 of them?
I think about 3 of them I thought were salient at the time I wrote the article.
Because what I want to do is I want to just name them and say, that's what they are.
Okay.
Here's some traits,
Yep.
and here's the things that we can look for to say that's a potential for conflict.
Here's one of them, and there's one that would surprise you too. Antisocial traits. And at the level of personality disorder, we're talking about a psychopath. But there are people walking around who just have those traits and characteristics that probably some brushes with the law. They don't have a whole lot of empathy for other people. They pretty much have a disregard for other people's safety needs or anything like that. They tend to be a little reckless, a little impulsive, very manipulative, very, very much a con artist, and they don't profit from their experience. They keep making the same mistakes over and over again, getting into trouble, but they don't profit from it. You know, so a guy like that who has those type of traits, and you can discern them pretty quickly, even if you don't know the guy. They can be dangerous. And again, it goes back to their impulse control. So you got a void there. You got a blank. So my default setting is that they're dangerous always, except for when they're not.
And how would you counter that?
Well, again, you go back into that OODA loop. That's the data in orientation that leads you to a decision. Now, this is an area where we probably ought to talk about Colin Powell's thinking on this, but we can probably get to that if we have time. Another one would be narcissistic traits. Now, these are people who aren't necessarily, well, I could mention a politician, but I won't do that for the sake of people's feelings.
Okay.
These are people who have an overblown sense of self-worth. They're very arrogant. They also really don't care about you. Your job in their world is to admire them incessantly. Now, the problem with that, usually there's no problem with that because, what the hell. But there's two types of them in my scheme. One's called the inflexible or the arrogant. That really they're oblivious. You don't admire them that much, or you fail to appreciate their outstanding qualities, they'll just go away and find somebody who does. But there's another type, and this is what you want to be on the lookout for. It's lesser known, but they're out there. They're called the fragile narcissist. Now, they will do one of two things if you fail to honor them. They'll either explode, which is pretty unlikely, but it can happen, and I've seen it happen, or they will implode. Now, if they implode, walk away. Stay away from them.
What are you talking, implode, depression?
Oh, no, they'll just fall apart. They'll just have an emotional breakdown. Now that's kind of rare, but I have seen it happen, and you know what? That's not a problem for me. I'm more concerned about if I offend them too much by not admiring them. Wow, they're going to haul off and get angry and explode, and I've seen that happen too, depending on their impulse control.
So you could say in the same sentence, when you see somebody with those traits, that there is a possibility that it could happen,
right.
And depending on the characteristics of whether he implodes or explodes, changes it from possibility to probability.
Right, depending on how they unfold
Right.
themselves to you. The longer you have, the more they'll unfold. The shorter time you have with them, you got to really be sharp, and just be watching for it. My best advice is, just give them a wide berth, disengage, because why would you,
Now
what's in it for you?
You're a gun guy. You
Oh, yeah.
know there's a gun for every situation.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? That would be, what we're discussing now would be like you have all these guns for different situations, but you got them all locked up and you only carry your revolver.
Right.
We have access to all this other stuff that we utilize. That's why I think this is a great conversation, because it opens up our minds to stuff we probably know. We just didn't put names on them. We have really sensed how we can apply it to our self-defense. And what you're telling us is there's all these different things to look at. There's these different weapons that we can use or tools that we can use for our defense. If we know them and understand them, we can apply them for probability.
That's what I believe.
And wasn't there another one, though? There was
There's some that are actually mental disorders, because personality isn't where you apply the term mental illness. It's not exculpatory in a court, for instance, for an insanity defense. That they live on Axis 2 in the manual. That doesn't really matter. But over on Axis 1 is where you have the true mental disorders like schizophrenics, paranoid schizophrenics, who I think are very dangerous, impulse control disorders, intermittent explosive disorder, manic depressive or bipolar disorder. They bring a lot of challenges, and I think you need to be able to at least recognize those and put that into your planning matrix, because it may be a factor.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're running out of time. We've got about 5 minutes left. So what I wanted to open up to you, Dr. Trent, and that is, you were talking about Colin Powell.
Right.
Why don't you explain that? I get the sense that that's an important thing in
Yeah,
here, so let's talk about it.
He's a guy I admire an awful lot. I was obviously on active duty during his time frame. Now, I'll tell you straight up, I think he's a liberal, but he's an old-fashioned American liberal, so I'm okay with Colin Powell. I can forgive him that. But he came up with a method he calls the 40-70 rule. Now, at first blush, you say, what in the world is he talking about? Here it is. When you're under pressure, when you have to make a hasty, critical decision, okay, and you don't have the luxury of time on your side, Powell submits that if you have at least 40% of the available data, and you don't have to have 100% because that leads to a paralysis analysis and all
yeah.
that stuff. But somewhere between 40% and 70% of the available data that you're confident in, make the decision. Make the decision right then. Now that's not quite like saying, you need to have a plan to kill everybody you meet, but it's more in line with that in a good way, not a bad way, because it gives you some parameters. And if you think, okay, I probably got about 60% of it, I'm going to make the decision right now because I don't have the luxury to stand here and,
that's right.
Exactly.
And that's where does that come into play in your article? It says here the sixth sense.
Yeah. I was going to talk about that under observation, but you got 5 senses, and those are what's in play. You can see it, you can hear it, you can touch it, you can feel it, and sometimes you can taste it. Okay, that's all good stuff. The problem is how to put that all together and enhance it. God gave us a way to do that. It's a little mechanism in our brain that synthesizes it, but that little mechanism breaks down under pressure or stress. So I always believe in the sixth sense. Now, depending on everything else being equal, you're not crazy yourself or anything, you got to listen to that. Because you explained that very well a little bit earlier in the program. Actually, we're perceiving through these 5 normal senses, and perception is thinking about what we just scanned in. But there's another mechanism going on under the surface called subsection. And that's really important to listen to because your body is analyzing these things. Your brain is, your mind is, analyzing these things that you're not even aware of. So if you get that little feeling in the pit of your gut, start paying closer attention. And that's where I think that sixth sense comes in. Now, it could lead you wrong, but I don't think it's ever led me wrong.
I'd rather go with my gut than pretty much anything. I'd rather be on the safe side.
Yep. Every time I have failed to acknowledge it, I've done something stupid.
Yes, I know. It's weird. I mean, you're wrong sometimes. I know you're going to be wrong sometimes, but the gut seems to be from experiences you've had in the past.
Right.
This sense, I feel something going on. It's that spidey sense tingling,
Precisely.
So, Dr. Trent, we've only got like a minute left, or a minute and a half left. Is there, we need to get you back on again to go over this in more depth. I didn't realize how fast as time goes.
Well, like I always say, light them up if you got them. I'm going to be talking for a while. So.
Is there anything you want to close up with? Anything that you want the people to know out there they can go to, or is this just?
Yeah, I would say this, Matt, and I've felt this for the longest time. The fact that we are licensed to employ potentially lethal force, what that means is that we're held to a higher standard.
Absolutely.
So I think that the more you know about various things, the more you train, like your excellent classes, and the more you bring into your side of the equation, I think you're going to be better off and be more responsible.
Couldn't argue with that statement at all.